Good morning. Before announcements, as we begin, we would like to acknowledge that this service is being held by a community that gathers on the stolen traditional lands of the Massachusetts, Nipmuc, Pawtucket, and Wampanoag people. We pay respect to those Indigenous people who lost their lives in the colonization of this land, and recognize that these Indigenous tribes are still facing violations of sovereignty, territory, and water. We also give thanks for the earth we walk upon, the waters, the life-giving plants, and all the earth's creatures, as well as the wind, sun, moon, and stars. We recognize that this is just a first step in moving toward right relationship with Native peoples and healing of the earth. And so good morning, and welcome to the First Parish Church of Stowe and Acton, FPC, to our members and friends, a welcoming and spiritual community. My name is Meg Rivers-Wright, and I serve as your parish administrator and membership coordinator. If this is your first time with us, we welcome you. Please let us know you are here by filling out one of our visitor information cards in the pews and hand it to an usher, drop it in the plate, or hand it to me, and I'll be seated at the back, and I'll be at coffee hour. We won't add you to any email lists unless you check that box to do so. I know that when I was first visiting this church, I just wanted to sneak in the back and listen to a good service. So I don't want to hound any of you if you're new. Come on over and say hi, fill out the card if it feels like the right thing for you. We just want to know you are here and where you're from, and hope that you'll return. Please feel free to ask me or any of these people for more information about the church and its programs after the service, or by email or through the chat if you're online. We also invite you to check out our webpage for news and information, and you can also sign up there for our newsletter and email alerts, if you want. We ask that people remain masked in our sanctuary, except in the balcony and in church offices and RE spaces, and if you're up here. But the rest of our building is mask optional. Please check with people you're talking to about their comfort levels, and please make sure the air filters are on when you congregate in any room. If you would like a large print order of service or hymnal or an assisted listening device, please ask our ushers. Our assisted listening devices are actually small radios that work throughout the building if you'd like to listen to the service from another space for any reason. After the service, please join us for coffee and conversation in our fellowship hall, which is one level down that hall at the other end of our building, or in a breakout room if you're joining us online. I'd like to draw your attention to just one of the announcements in our order of service, and that is for our concert, Heather Maloney in concert on Saturday, March 4th at 7 p.m. right here. It's put on by the New Revival Coffee House. I've been watching her on YouTube, and she's pretty terrific. Beautiful, beautiful voice. Tickets are on sale here today. You can always buy them online, but they charge you a little bit of a small fee, and you can buy them at the door for $20. But people on the Coffee House committee are saying that they think these tickets are going to sell out pretty fast, hotcakes. So if you're interested, please buy today. And they are $17. And then finally, we're joined today by Sherilyn Reno. And Sherilyn Reno is the Director of Religious Exploration at the Unitarian Universalist Society of Grafton and Upton in Grafton, Mass. She's been a volunteer religious educator off and on for 30 years, serving churches in Michigan, Maryland, and Massachusetts, but this is her first paying gig. She lives in Grafton with her husband, Jerry, daughters Vivian, Marilyn, and Arwen, and 4 cats and 1 snake. Sherilyn has known Reverend Cindy since high school and is credited with introducing her to Zentangle. Sherilyn is Assistant Scoutmaster for Scouts BSA Troop 221 in Framingham and serves on the Waste Reduction and Recycling Committee for the town of Grafton. She loves to crochet, quilt, and solve jigsaw puzzles in her copious spare time. Now I invite you to greet your neighbor. Let's spend a few minutes.
Hey folks, we have a quick framing question for your Greet Your Neighbor time, especially for our kids today. If you could all tell each other, what is your favorite animal? And do you just like do a slide over?
As always, if you know the song, you're welcome to sing along.
Some of us have clever, some of us have been, some of us are furry, some of us have grins. We swim and laugh and slither, we leap and soar and run, and we all live together on a planet of the sun. We are all earthlings. We are all earthlings. Earthlings, spinning around together on a planet of the sun. Floating down the river, swinging through the trees, climbing up a mountain, and going with the breeze. All of us can have a happy, healthy place to be. We can float and swim and fly in the rainbow. We are all earthlings. We are all earthlings. Spinning around together on a planet of the sun. Spinning around together on a planet of the sun.
Good morning. Our opening words are from Susan McGinn, Call from Beyond. From beyond the playful summer clouds, beyond the earth's thin blue line, from beyond the bright moon and meteor showers, we hear the call to look and listen carefully, to turn away from a world that buys and sells happiness, to fully experience the luring whisper of your heart's truth. Why not today? Why not now? We are here and together at home in this evolving place. Home in this ever-changing breath and body. Home in this dewy morning, even as it reaches towards a hopefully high, hot noon. We hear the call from far beyond and deep within, and we do not hear it alone. Come, let us worship together.
Last Sunday was Charles Darwin's birthday, and Reverend Cindy and I did the service together at my church in Grafton and Upton with the plan to bring the same service here to you today. And it was really a lot of fun to write a service together with one of my best friends. Our spiritual theme in Grafton and Upton for the month is stars. Yours is love. And so we're weaving together ideas of evolution and space and our place in the scheme of things. We light our chalice today for the light of inspiration, the fire of knowledge, that we may continue to question, to explore, and to learn.
Please rise in body and spirit and join in our opening hymn number 343, A Fire, Mist, and a Planet. We're singing the first three verses. And please join in our covenant and some different words of affirmation that are in your orders of service. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Sing loudly till the stars have heard. In joy feast on this bounteous word. Our praises call us to its throne. The sun shall rise and set no more.
Once, you were just a tiny speck inside your mother. But then you grew and grew and grew until one day you were ready to come into the light and be born. And that day became your birthday. Just like you, the universe also has a birthday. Tens of billions of years ago, the universe itself was just a tiny speck of potential, smaller than a soccer ball, smaller than a pea, even smaller than a pencil dot. And then one day, everything changed. The universe began to grow in an instant and went from a small speck to an enormously hot baseball of bright energy, brighter and hotter and denser than anyone could ever imagine. And then, before you could blink an eye, not that there were eyes back then or people to blink them, bang, it exploded to an enormous size. We call that the Big Bang, but since there weren't ears around to hear it, we don't really know if there was a sound. The universe kept growing after its explosion, trying to find its right size. Our new, young, exciting universe, like a small child, was not particularly restful or tidy. Energy zapped and zipped around everywhere, banged and collided, then suddenly pop. There was something that had never been seen before, the first particle, and oops, the first antiparticle. They collided and were gone. This happened millions of billions of times. Eventually, there was matter that stayed around for more than a few microseconds. This matter joined the spinning dance of energy. Clouds of light formed. Then, amazingly, the particles of matter began to clump together. These clumps formed patterns and broke apart again until they found one that they liked. The first atoms, hydrogen and helium. To the newborn universe, all of this seemed to have happened in just a few seconds, but in the way we tell time, it had taken hundreds of thousands of years. And now things got really exciting. The strange new force called gravity pulled groups of hydrogen and helium atoms together. The closer the atoms got, the hotter the cluster got, and the stronger gravity's pull became. More and more atoms joined each cluster, forming protostars, which expanded into galaxies. Some of the protostars collected too many atoms, and their gravity made them collapse into black holes from which nothing could escape. Others collected just the right amount to bake the hydrogen and helium atoms into new elements: carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, calcium, just to name a few, all the elements needed to make up life. Even though this had taken 1 billion of our years, it wasn't time for life to form yet. Billions more years went by. One of the galaxies that had been formed was the one we now call the Milky Way, and off on one of its spiraling arms, a protostar went supernova, sending clumps of elements flying, each clump spinning around a center point. The hydrogen in this smaller clump began to gather together just as the original hydrogen had done at the beginning of the universe, heating up into a glowing ball of gas. Groups of the other elements also gathered into clusters and began to spin, still all rotating around the center until finally, after 8.5 billion years, our solar system became almost what we see today. We had a sun. We had planets at different distances from the sun. Some were too hot. Some were too cold, but at least one was just right. We call that planet our Earth. This is how Earth looks now, But if there had been people to see it then, it would have been unrecognizable to us. Meteors, globs of rock thrown off from other planets or stars or galaxies kept hitting the Earth. Each meteor brought new mass and new energy to our baby planet. Finally, the meteor stopped. The Earth cooled. Molecules made of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom, water, started collecting above the surface of the Earth in clouds, and then it began to rain. It rained for thousands of years until water covered the surface of the planet. Occasionally, hot rock would bubble up from the core of the Earth, magma. This magma cooled into lava, which cooled into land masses, which poked up out of the enormous ocean. And as it cools, the molecules within it organize themselves into patterns that we can find in the rocks we see today. On the surface of the water, other elements like carbon, nitrogen, oxygen also began to organize themselves, but instead of hardening into rock, these squiggly parades of molecules floated freely in the water. Add a little energy from a lightning strike and wow, suddenly they're moving on their own. It was life, Jim, but not as we know it. The first bacteria, they could eat sunlight and use it to rip the hydrogens off water molecules to use for energy while releasing oxygen, were born. Those bacteria were just the beginning. And as they were formed of the same stuff as stars, just as I am, just as you are, just as your pet dog or cat or bird or snake is. We are all star stuff. As you came in, you received from the ushers some star stickers. So as we end this first part of the story, please feel free to adorn yourselves, your families, your friends with stars to remind us that we are star stuff.
On the TV show Babylon 5, which was an outer space TV show, sci-fi show, one of the characters once said, "We are star stuff. We are the universe made manifest, trying to figure itself out." And as we have both learned, sometimes the universe requires a change of perspective. And similarly, on Doctor Who, the doctor once said, "Hey, do you mind if I tell you a story? One you might not have heard. All the elements in your body were forged many millions of years ago in the heart of a faraway star that exploded and died." He continued, "That explosion scattered those elements across the desolations of deep space. And so, after many millions of years, these elements came together to form new stars and new planets, and on it went. The elements came together and burst apart, forming shoes and ships and sealing wax and cabbages and kings, until eventually they came together to make you. You are unique in the universe." Now, these are science fiction stories, but they're talking about real science, using language made popular by the scientist Carl Sagan, who said it in so many times and in so many ways, one of which was, quote, "The cosmos is within us. We are made of star stuff. We are a way for the universe to know itself." That's science. We are made of star stuff. But we can take from that scientific truth and we can give it human-based meaning. We can make it poetry. We can make it TV shows. We can make it theology, which means we can make it part of our worldview and belief about the nature of humanity, the nature of the cosmos, the nature of God, if you're a God believer, the nature of ultimate reality, if you're not. So, for example, the poet Pat Maine Ellis wrote a poem called "Scientists Find the Universe Awash in Tiny Diamonds," which was actually posted on the NASA website of the scientists who found that fact. Part of the poem says this: "Does this explain why some of us are so hard, why some of us shine, why all of us are precious, that we are awash in creation, spumed with diamonds, shot through with beauty, that survived the death of stars?" I have always taken this to fact that we are made of stardust and shot through with diamonds, that the universe is awash in. And it means two things to my religious beliefs, two things that I learned from Carl Sagan religiously, ironically. One is that we are each and every one of us precious and unique and important. I've probably told you this before, because as I said a couple weeks ago, ministers only have a couple sermons in them, and they give them over and over again. One of mine is love. The other is we are precious and unique. We embody that first principle of Unitarian Universalism, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, shot through with stardust. The second part of that message from Carl Sagan is also that we are in the vast, vast universe, one of billions on a single planet, Earth, in the sun's solar system, in the Milky Way galaxy, that is one of uncounted numbers of galaxies. So we are small and insignificant too. We are small and insignificant, but we are connected, and we are shot through with diamonds and awash in stardust, precious, unique, and a part of the whole of it. One of the ways we affirm our connection and the preciousness of each one of us is sharing our joys and sorrows here in gathered community every week. And so if you have a joy or sorrow, I invite you to raise your hand, and our lay minister, Ann Sadler, or one of our ushers will bring you a microphone. We don't have any joys and sorrows that were sent by email this week. So we'll begin with those here in the sanctuary, and then we'll share those online. I wanted to light a candle myself today for all those families who lost someone or have a student who they're still working for the health and safety of at Michigan State University. Sherilyn is a graduate of Michigan State University, as is my sister and her sister and dozens of people we know. And together, we probably know dozens of families with students right now at Michigan State. People from our high school friends, people from our college friends, and people from our just Michigan friends. So we're holding all of them in our thoughts and prayers this week. Now let us turn to a moment of silent prayer or meditation with these words from the Reverend Gary Kowalski. We give thanks for the earth and its creatures, and we are grateful from A to Z. For alligators, apricots, acorn, and apple trees, for bumblebees, bananas, blueberries, and beagles, coconuts, crawdads, cornfield, and coffee, daisies, elephants, and flying fish, for groundhogs, glaciers, and grasslands, hippos, and hazelnuts, icicles, and iguanas, juniper, jackrabbits, and June bugs, kudzu, and kangaroos, lightning bugs, and licorice, for mountains and milkweed and mistletoe, for narwhals, nasturtiums, otters, and ocelots, for peonies, persimmon, and polar bears, quahogs, and Queen Anne's lace, for raspberries and roses, salmon and sassafras, tornadoes and tulips, urchins and valleys and waterfalls, yaks and yams and yogurt. And we are grateful, good earth, not least of all, for zinnias, zucchini, and zebras, and for the alphabet of wonderful things that are as simple as A, B, C. Let's take a moment of silent prayer or meditation. I forgot that we're intergenerational only for K-8 today. So if at this time any high schoolers are in the congregation who wish to leave for our high school discussion group, please do so. For all these joys and sorrows that are shared and are in our hearts and minds left unspoken as well, let's lift up a moment of prayer and thanks and gratitude for the ability to be with one another in community. Amen. Our next hymn is number 208, All Creatures of the Earth and Sky. There are 5 verses, but we're going to sing the first 3, which are the ones in the stanzas and not the ones printed below. Please rise in body or in spirit.
we left off with bacteria. Bacteria that ate hydrogen and produced oxygen. They reproduced by making copies of themselves, copies that were all exactly the same because of those chains of floating molecules that we now call DNA. There was one problem though. Too much oxygen was toxic to bacteria. They needed a solution fast. Some bacteria hid deeper below the surface of the ocean where there was less oxygen. Other bacteria changed their DNA, so oxygen was a friend rather than a foe. Evolution had begun. From now on, living beings on Earth would become more and more different from each other with every generation. Some of these newly evolved bacteria decided that a diet of just hydrogen was boring, and they decided to eat other bacteria instead. And this is where it got really strange. One day, somewhere in the oceans teeming with life, two bacteria tried to eat each other. But instead, they fused into a single new kind of earthling, the eukaryote. Too much oxygen was still a problem for these new earthlings, but help had already arrived. The oxygen-friendly bacteria had figured out how to use oxygen to make energy. Now, at first, the eukaryotes just ate these tasty little packets of energy, but then they evolved to keep them as new parts of themselves. The race to more complicated forms of life had begun. At first, these new beings used the traditional "we'll split into two" method of reproduction. Then some eukaryotes started fusing themselves into a new kind of being, mixing together their DNA before splitting again. Unique new beings were created. The new beings tended to hang out in colonies. As these colonies expanded, different eukaryotes began to take on special roles. Some would make energy, some would eat, some would handle waste. They were almost multicellular creatures, but not quite. We can still see evidence of these colonies today. Then something happened. Scientists don't know exactly what, but whatever it was, wiped out most of these proto-creatures. And then, poof, 540 million years ago, there suddenly appeared a myriad of new kinds of creatures. Jellyfish with long, stringy, muscular tentacles. Trilobites, who wore their skeletons on the outside of their bodies. Long, wiggly, worm-like creatures who started to develop a nervous system running along their bodies. And all of these creatures lived in the sea. And then the earthlings began to move on to land. First came the eukaryotes. Remember those guys? The sunlight-eating eukaryotes developed into our first plants, and the stuff-eating eukaryotes developed into the first fungi. These two formed a close relationship, plants above the ground, fungi below the ground, and they helped each other, both the plants and the fungi, and they grew to gigantic sizes. The animals who wore their skeletons on the outside of the body, they came up on land, developed wings, and took to the air. They were the first insects. Dragonflies as big as crows zipped around the early Earth. The wiggly, wormy creatures became the first fish. Then some of the fish developed air-breathing lungs and came up on land, and after many years became the first amphibians, animals who live part of their life on the land and part of it in the water. Eventually, some of the amphibians became able to lay their eggs on land, and what hatched from these eggs were the first reptiles. Reptiles could now go anywhere on land, and they quickly overran the whole globe. Life was everywhere. But then it happened again. Catastrophe. Almost everything died. A few reptiles did survive, and these evolved again. Some of them took the lizardy path, and after millions of years, grew and became the fearsome beasts we call the dinosaurs. The other reptiles took a different route. They stayed small. They grew hair, and they stayed out of the dinosaurs' way. The first mammals. Some of the lizard-like creatures developed leathery wings and then feathers. They were birds. And the plants developed seeds and fruits that could be spread around the world by all these new creeping and flying creatures. Everything seemed perfect on planet Earth now, but the universe wasn't done with us yet. One last Huge destructive meteorites smashed into the planet and killed almost everything. All the dinosaurs died, leaving behind plants, insects, birds, creatures in the sea, and yes, the little mammals. And now it was the birds and the mammals' turn to shine. Birds of all sizes flew across the sky. Some were huge, some were small. The small fuzzy mammals evolved in many directions. Some developed sharp, pointy teeth and claws and chased down other animals for food, early versions of cats and dogs. Some grew large eating plants and developed hooves for feet, horses and giraffes, goats and sheep. Some returned to the sea and became whales and dolphins and seals. And one group of mammals learned to walk on just 2 legs. They could use their arms to carry things. These animals lived in family groups at first and then in groups of families. They learned how to use objects as tools and weapons. They learned how to make fire stay where they wanted it to and to use it to cook their food. They learned how to make images to represent real things. They learned how to use the parts of their mouth to shape sound. They invented speech, words, language, communication, and song. They learned to think, to argue, to reason, to question. They were now human.
Before science taught us otherwise, classical thought and Christian theology, exemplified by the book of Genesis and the poet Alexander Pope, taught us to think about non-human animals as separate from us and below us. In the great chain of beings, only humans are created in the image of God, and every other animal is under our dominion. Actually, women are under the dominion of men too, but that's a whole separate service. But in Unitarian Universalism, we draw from a lot of different religious sources. And one of our sources is science, which told us that what we now believe is true, that humans evolved from the animals and learned to speak. Humans learned communication and song, and humans learned to walk, and of course, to talk, and learn to question and love. And all of that does make us precious and special. But we remember that we are connected to the animals, evolved from the animal kingdom, and that everything that is true for us is true for some degree to other animals as well. I mean, birds can walk on 2 legs, right? They only have 2 legs. Well, what about mammals, you say? What mammals walk on 2 legs? Well, what about kangaroos? They don't walk on 2 legs, but they sure hop on them. And lots of other animals, of course, from bears to various monkeys, do walk for short periods on 2 legs and pull themselves up on their back legs to get things. Well, what about communicating? Well, there are plenty of people who would say that this isn't really learning words, but I've been teaching our cat Mercury to learn words. We have 3 buttons that he can press when he wants things. One says treats, one says play, and one says porch. And the truth is Mercury learned these 3 really quickly, but now he got bored with them and he's pretty much forgotten all of them except porch, which he has learned the longest despite the fact that we've stopped letting him out on the porch for the winter. So yes, cats' capacity for language is much more limited than ours, but they do communicate in so many ways, right, cat owners? Your cats communicate with you. Our other cat, Loki, when we forget to fill his water dish, he'll wait till one of us gets in the bathroom, and then he'll stand in the bathtub and meow. It's pretty clear he's letting me know that he wants water. And then when he wants treats, which he wants all the time, and my husband Peter always gives him the treats, but he doesn't think Peter will listen to his meowing. So he will climb on my lap, nudge me until I start to pet him. As soon as I reach to pet him, he'll jump off my lap, go stand in front of Peter and look at him pointedly and look back at me. Until I say, Peter, Loki wants treats, and then he'll like meow and chirp, and like act sweet to Peter until Peter gets up and gives him treats. If he doesn't, he'll do this whole pattern repeatedly until he gets his treats. So, I mean, there's an argument maybe that cats are smarter than us and have us really well trained. But definitely, animals are smart, and they definitely have their ways of communicating. And I know that you all, like dog owners and other pet owners, could tell us dozens of ways that you've seen animals communicate their wants and their needs to us as humans. Now, I can't prove that animals to some degree have questions about the nature of the universe, but I do believe they have deep bonds that it's not unreasonable to call love. Charles Darwin, who we're going to talk about a little bit more today, thought so too. He said, besides love and sympathy, animals exhibit other qualities connected with the social instincts, which in us would be called moral. He said, and I agree with Agassiz that dogs possess something very like a conscience. He also said, in language that sounds a little bit wrong to us, because he says man where we would say human, he said, there is no fundamental difference between man and animals in their ability to feel pain and pleasure, happiness and misery. I agree. Humans are animals. But you know what? Animals are all made of stardust, shot through with diamonds, each one important and special, and each one part of the vast universe and interconnected in the web of all existence. That's science, but it is also faith. And that's my religious belief, sacred, connected, important, and awash in diamonds made out of stardust. We are all animals. This month, our plate is shared with RIA, Ready, Inspire, Act, and for the good work of RIA House, which you can read more about in your order of service or your newsletter online, for their good work and the work of this church, we gratefully receive the morning's offerings.
Some sing low, some sing high, some sing out loud on the telephone line. And some just clap their hands, their paws, or anything they got. Listen to the bass, it's acknowledgement, roll, and the hippopotamus, bones and growth in the midnight, and the old dog just goes moo. All God's creatures got a place in the choir. Some sing low, and some sing high, and some sing out loud on the telephone wire. And some just clap their hands, their paws, or anything they got. The dogs and the cats, they take up the middle where the honey comes and the crickets fiddle. The donkey plays the calling and the old gray badger sighs. All God's creatures got a place in the choir. Some sing low and some sing high, and some sing out loud on the telephone wire. And some just clap their hands, their paws, or anything they got. Listen to the hawk with the little birds singing and the melodies sound from high notes ringing and the hoot-owl cries over everything, and the blackbird disagrees. No, all God's creatures got a place in the choir. Some sing low, and some sing high, and some sing out loud on the telephone wire. And some just clap their hands, their paws, or anything they got. Singing in the night time, singing in the day, and the little dog pipes and he's on his way. And the otter has got much to say, and the porcupine talks to himself. All God's creatures got
Almost as soon as a small child learns to speak, they begin to ask questions. Who are you? What is this? How does it work? And of course, there's always why. Why can't I touch it? Why is the sky blue? For a short time, parents can get away with answering because, or that's just how it is. But as children get older, their questions become more complex and they become less willing to accept because as an answer. And so it was with these early humans. Using their language and their reasoning, they began to explore the world around them. They looked up to the stars and wondered what they were. Were they holes in the sky that light passed through? Were they some sort of glowing bird that only flew around at night? Were they fires? Why did they stay in certain patterns? Did those patterns mean anything? They also looked at themselves and the creatures with which they shared the world. What are we made out of? How did we come to be here? Why do some animals eat meat and other plants? Why do people from other areas look and speak differently? Where does evil come from? What is truth? At first, they looked to their imaginations for the answers. Origin stories gave exciting answers, answers full of gods and demons and mythical beasts, answers full of praise and blessings, wrongs and retribution. As the centuries went on, these early answers came to feel like just because to many humans. People began to question what they thought was true, to look deeper for answers. They began to map the stars and use them for navigation. They began to study the life cycles of plants and to make them grow where humans wanted them to. They studied the behavior of animals and learned how to tame them. They experimented with the laws of physics and built enormous monuments. Philosophers tackled the harder questions. They debated why we exist. They tried to define evil. They argued whether truth existed at all. And if it did, how could we know what it was? Natural philosophers were sure that truth existed and that we could find it through careful study of everything we can observe. There were mistakes, of course. Humanity spent many years believing that the earth was the center of everything that existed. Galileo and his friends cleared that up for us. Some early scientists believed that teensy-weensy preformed humans were contained in the male gamete cells, an answer that was strangely absolutely entirely incorrect and yet sort of true at the same time. Others even believed that if you made a physical change to an adult animal, its children would have the same change when they were born. The tools that we used to search for truth became more and more sophisticated. That meant the answers could come closer and closer to being right. Better clocks and new ways of doing math allowed sailors to use the stars to determine exactly where they were at sea. Microscopes allowed scientists to look into cells where they did not observe any teensy-weensy preformed humans. Observations of farm animals made it clear that it was not at all true that if you cut the tail off an adult cow, all her calves would be born tailless. Now, our story has covered billions of years today, but now we're almost in the present. A little more than 200 years ago, a man was born who had changed the way we looked at ourselves and our fellow earthlings. We celebrated his birthday last week, Charles Darwin. Darwin spent a lot of time observing nature. That's what he loved doing, and he was very good at it. After years of traveling, observing animals, and studying both the things that made them the same and the things that made them different, Darwin published his theory of natural selection. This is the best explanation that has been found to answer the question, how did we come to be? But scientists did not stop there. Over the next 100 years, we kept questioning. As microscopes improved, scientists were able to see smaller and smaller and smaller things. Not only could we see cells, but we could also see all of the details of the parts that made up cells. Biologists had been studying genetic traits for years, and now they could see the DNA that coded them. As telescopes improved, scientists were able to see more distant stars, and new types of stars were identified. Then, in the late 1950s, two big contests began. One having to do with outer space, and the other having to do with the space inside our cells. The United States and the Soviet Union were both headed for space. Sputnik 1 and Vanguard 1 were launched, the first objects made by humans to orbit the Earth. A few years later, Yuri Gagarin and Alan Shepard became the first human beings to escape the pull of gravity for space. The race for the moon was on. Meanwhile, tucked away in biochemistry and microbiology labs, scientists worked to figure out the sequence of human genes. They discovered ways to make DNA copy itself outside the human body. They discovered enzymes that would cut the DNA at the same place every time, so that they could compare DNA between different people and between different species. Once computers were advanced enough, they entered all the data they discovered and let the computers do the long job of math and comparing samples for them. This became the Human Genome Project. It was 1969 when the first human walked on the surface of the moon. Some of us here are probably old enough to remember that. I'm not. I was only 2 months old at the time. 34 years later, in 2003, scientists published the full sequence of human genes. The two big contests were over. Did scientists stop there? Of course not. One of the most exciting things about science is that the more answers you find, the more things you know that you don't know. Since the moon landing, scientists of all types have been working together. Biologists helped astronauts learn how to live and work in space for long periods of time. Astronauts have done experiments in space for biologists to see how different forms of life react to weightlessness. Doctors have been able to use gene sequencing to solve problems and cure diseases. And geologists have found evidence of the chemicals needed to build life on meteorites that have landed on our planet. The robotic rovers on Mars have found these same chemicals on Mars. Space probes have found bodies of water on some of the other planets and moons in our solar system. And the newest and most advanced telescopes have found other solar systems with planets that show the signs of those same life-building chemicals, the star stuff of which we're created. Our study of space and cells have answered many of the questions humans have asked. We know where we came from now, and we know what we're made of, but we still search. We still stand on Earth and look up at the stars. How long until we travel among them? Will there be other beings on other planets? Another question we still don't have an answer to is, what is truth? We still search for that as well. When we did this service with my congregation last week, I asked everyone to write down a truth that they knew or something they were searching for. And one of the answers was, there will always be a why. That was that person's truth. There will always be another why.
Indeed, we are still searching and searching. And in Darwin's time, they were still fighting the ideas of science, not that we do that now, right? Darwin said, we can allow satellites, planets, suns, and universe, the whole systems of universe to be governed by laws, but the smallest insect we wish to be created all at once by a special act. And indeed, some still struggle with the man's ideas about how humanity evolved and how animals evolved as well. Struggle against science is nothing new, and something that our religion, Unitarian Universalism, takes seriously. Darwin was one of us, a Unitarian in his time. In our recent few years, we've had the pandemic that affected our lives in so many ways, and we've learned more than perhaps ever before in many of our lifetimes the importance of science. And of course, people have struggled against this. And some of us have lived through plagues before, like the AIDS epidemic, but all of us here have lived through this pandemic. And we know that as much as we sheltered, as much as we were able, our jobs and our schools and our families were able to, we also waited anxiously for the day that the vaccine would come. And those who couldn't be vaccinated waited anxiously too, because the vaccination of others would help them. And we watched as scientists looked into the mysteries of human cells and human RNA, not DNA, but RNA, which acts as a messenger. And we were fascinatingly focused on the very, very small and the ways it could save us from the disaster we were enduring. On the other side of that scale, there's the way the very, very big science can save us as well. African-American science fiction writer Octavia Butler wrote in her books, The Parable of the Sower and The Parable of the Talents, about the goal of a future world where the planet was dying and people were having a horrible time, not a pandemic, but a world filled with violence and fear. And in that world, a young woman starts having thoughts about what should be the destiny of humanity, which she calls Earthseed. And she wrote this: "The destiny of Earthseed is to take root among the stars. It is to live and thrive on new earths. It is to become new beings and consider new questions. It is to leap into the heavens again and again. It is to explore the vastness of heaven. It is to explore the vastness of ourselves." It's a big thing to think about. And the potential for exploring the universe and making our home on other planets is something we're not quite to. But this is one of the big potentials for the future that we can still dream about. Ms. Sherilyn mentioned another possibility, the search for life that is beyond ours. And in one of my favorite books and movies, Carl Sagan's Cosmos, he writes of a scientist who does travel beyond the stars and discovers other life. And eventually she travels and meets extraterrestrial life. And she says, "I was given something wonderful, something that changed me forever, a vision of the universe that tells us undeniably how tiny and insignificant, how rare and precious we are. A vision that tells us we belong to something that is greater than ourselves, that we are not, that none of us is alone." Charles Darwin gave us a vision of how we're connected to all the life on this earth. We evolved. We came from the smallest particles, single-celled beings, which evolved and grew into life in the water and then out of the water onto land, and some grew wings and some stayed in the sea and some evolved and evolved until here we were, humans. But scientists also give us the big vision of how we're connected beyond this. We are stardust. We are part of all life that is. And we are part of what is beyond. And truly, I think, don't you, that there must be life out there on other planets. I can't show it to you. I can't prove it. But I believe in aliens as much as I believe in those prehistoric forms of life on Earth that go back further than the skeleton history does. These searches for truth, big and small, the race to space, the race to the understanding of the smallest parts inside of us, are all wound up together in the mysteries that unfold in the universe. One of our current UU principles is the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And science, as we search, gives us that truth. And here, in religious community, we find that meaning. So science tells us we are stardust. And here we say we are precious and we are interconnected. May it be so. Our closing hymn is number 1064, one of my favorites, hopefully one of yours, Blue Boat Home in your teal hymnals.
I will sailing leaning over the edge in wonder, asking questions into the deep. Drifting here with my ship's companions, all we came with different souls, making our way by the lights of the heavens in our beautiful blue boat. I give thanks to the waves upholding me, and the brave winds urging me on. Bring the infinite sea before me, sing the sky my sailor song. I was born upon the fathom, never harbored or port have I known. Wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat.
Our words of benediction come from John Weston, Out of the Stars.
Out of the stars in their flight, out of the dust of eternity, here we have come.
Stardust and sunlight mingling through time and through space.
This is the wonder of time. This is the marvel of space.
Out of the stars swung the earth. Life upon earth rose to love.
This is the marvel of life, rising to see and to know.
Out of your heart cry wonder. Sing that we live.